Welcome to another exciting episode of the English Pod community. I'm your host, Blake. Let me start by asking you, do you find yourself struggling to understand fast English speakers? Or maybe you feel like your speaking skills aren't as sharp as you'd like? Well, you're in the right place. In this episode, we'll talk about how improving your English listening and speaking skills can go hand in hand, and how real-life stories can help you get better every day. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Here, we upload videos regularly to help you improve your English in a practical and engaging way. Whether you're listening to personal stories, learning useful expressions, or practicing real-life situations, we're here to help you grow in your English journey. Now, let's get into today's topic. When I first moved to the US to study, I had to get used to hearing English spoken really quickly. It was tough. I remember being in a coffee shop, trying to order a simple coffee, and the barista spoke so fast that I couldn't catch half of what she said. "One caramel latte, right?" she asked, but it felt like a blur. I wasn't sure if she was talking to me or someone else. I quickly realized that this was a challenge I would need to overcome if I wanted to make progress. One thing that helped me was listening to conversations around me. At first, I didn't understand much, but the more I listened, the more familiar the sounds became. I would hear people in the cafe talking about their weekends, discussing their favorite TV shows, and even joking around. These small, everyday conversations taught me important phrases and expressions that textbooks couldn't offer. Here's the thing. Listening to real-life situations like someone's weekend plans or a brief chat about work is a fantastic way to improve your listening skills. It's much more useful than just listening to news broadcasts or scripted audio. Real-life conversations teach you how people actually speak, how they use slang, shorten words, and blend sounds. This will help you sound more natural when you speak, and it will improve your understanding as well. Let me tell you another story that helped me improve my English speaking. One day, I was at a party with a group of people I had just met. I was nervous about speaking because I didn't want to make mistakes. But one guy named Mike, who had moved here from Canada, told me something that really stuck with me. He said, "Blake, the best way to learn is by speaking, even if you make mistakes. Don't worry about being perfect." That gave me the confidence to talk more. I started joining in on conversations, asking people questions about their day or their favorite activities. Slowly, I began to feel more comfortable speaking. And guess what? The more I practiced, the more my listening skills improved too. It's like a cycle. The more you speak, the more you learn about how English sounds in real life. This brings me to my next point: immersion. If you want to improve both your listening and speaking skills, surround yourself with English as much as you can. Watch movies, listen to podcasts, and talk to native speakers. In fact, I recommend joining an English-speaking group or community like the English Pod community. You can interact with people, ask questions, and improve your speaking skills while also enhancing your listening skills. Let me share a quick example of how I used immersion to improve my listening. I used to watch English TV shows without subtitles at first, which was tough, but after a while, I started catching words and phrases I hadn't noticed before. Eventually, I felt more comfortable with the speed of native speakers and began understanding what they were saying without pausing every few seconds. It was a rewarding experience, and it showed me how much listening can improve speaking too. So, if you're serious about improving your English, I encourage you to keep practicing. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. The more you listen to real-life situations and the more you practice speaking, the better you'll get. Remember, it's all about building confidence and familiarity with the language. I hope these stories and examples have given you some inspiration. Just know that improvement doesn't happen overnight, but with practice, you'll see progress. Stick around as we dive deeper into more tips and techniques. Thank you for sticking with me on this journey of improving your English. As we dive deeper into today's episode, I want to take a moment to emphasize how important it is to practice listening and speaking in a way that feels natural. Many learners focus too much on grammar or memorizing vocabulary, which is important, but it's the real-life experiences and everyday conversations that will truly take your English skills to the next level. Let me start with something personal. A couple of years ago, I traveled to a small town in the United States for a summer job. It was my first time being completely immersed in an English-speaking environment. My goal was to improve my listening skills, but at first, I had a lot of trouble understanding people. It wasn't that I didn't know the words they were using, but they spoke so quickly and their accents were different from what I had studied. It was overwhelming, especially when I went grocery shopping and had to communicate with cashiers, or when I tried to make friends at work. Sometimes I felt like I wasn't going to make it through the day because I couldn't catch everything, people said. But here's what I realized. The key to improving was not avoiding these situations, but facing them head on. At first, I would nod along and smile, pretending to understand everything. But after a while, I knew that wasn't going to help me improve. So I decided to start asking people to slow down or repeat themselves if I didn't catch something. Most people were understanding and happy to help. Over time, I noticed my confidence growing. I started to understand more and more, and I became better at responding to questions or participating in conversations. Now, this brings me to a very important point. Confidence is everything. If you're afraid of making mistakes or not understanding something, you're going to hesitate, and hesitation slows down your learning process. I want to share with you a conversation I had with a coworker at that job. Her name was Emily, and she was from the area, so she spoke very quickly. One day, she invited me to a small party at her house. I was a little nervous because I wasn't sure how well I would be able to understand everyone there. But Emily told me something I'll never forget. "Don't worry, Blake. Just join in and ask if you don't understand something." That simple advice really stuck with me. The next day, I went to that party, and even though I didn't understand everything at first, I tried to engage. I asked questions. I listened to how people responded. And little by little, I picked up phrases and expressions that I didn't know before. I was amazed at how many new things I learned just by participating in a casual conversation. This is the power of real-life listening. It's not just about hearing the words, it's about understanding the flow of a conversation and the emotions behind it. I started noticing how people would laugh, use gestures, or change their tone when telling a funny story, and I learned to use those same techniques in my own speaking. One thing I've noticed, especially after that experience, is how important it is to immerse yourself in English in every way possible. If you only listen to textbook audio or news reports, you're missing out on the richness of the language. Real-life conversations are filled with slang, idioms, and cultural references that you won't find in a classroom. But the more you listen to these conversations, the more comfortable you become with them. It's like a muscle. You have to exercise it regularly to make it stronger. So how can you immerse yourself in English? First, watch movies or TV shows in English without subtitles. You might not understand everything at first, but that's okay. Keep watching, and with time, you'll begin to pick up on the patterns and rhythms of spoken English. I started watching a lot of sitcoms, like Friends and The Office, and even though they spoke really quickly, I was able to follow the jokes and understand the main ideas. It took a lot of patience, but I kept practicing, and it paid off. Another Way to immerse yourself is by listening to podcasts or watching YouTube channels in English. And of course, I recommend the English Pod community. When you listen to these types of content, you're getting exposed to different accents, tones, and speaking styles. This exposure will help you recognize different ways people speak in various situations, whether it's a formal interview or a casual chat with friends. And don't forget to practice speaking along with the content. It's like training for a sport. If you want to be good at something, you have to practice it regularly. Now, let's talk a little bit about how this connects to your speaking skills. When you listen to real-life stories, like the ones I'm sharing with you today, you start to pick up on the phrases that native speakers use in their everyday conversations. I'll never forget the first time I heard someone say, "That's a game changer." I was confused at first because I had never heard that expression before. But after hearing it a few more times, I started using it myself. I started understanding when it was appropriate to say things like, "That blew my mind," or "It was a total disaster." These phrases aren't things you can easily find in textbooks, but they are used all the time in real conversations. One of the most valuable things I learned through this experience is how to use context to understand what's going on. When you listen to conversations, pay attention to the context, the setting, the emotions, the relationship between people, and that will help you understand words or phrases you might not know. For example, when I was at that party, I mentioned earlier I didn't always catch every single word, but I could follow along by reading the room. I noticed people laughing or nodding in agreement, and it gave me clues about what they were talking about. This is a powerful skill that will help you improve your listening in real-time situations. I also want to encourage you to speak as much as you can. I know it's easy to feel shy or embarrassed, but the truth is, speaking is the fastest way to improve. Start by repeating phrases you hear in movies or podcasts. Try to mimic the way the speakers say things. Pay attention to their intonation, their rhythm, and even their body language if you're watching a video. The more you speak, the more comfortable you'll get, and the more your listening skills will improve as well. In fact, I recently had a conversation with a friend who's also learning English. His name is David, and he's been studying English for a few years now. He told me that one of the best things he did to improve his speaking was to have regular conversations with native speakers. He said it was tough at first, but after a while he started feeling more natural and confident. David even told me a story about a time he made a mistake while ordering food at a restaurant. He accidentally said, "Can I have a piece of cake?" instead of "a slice of cake?" and everyone laughed. But David wasn't embarrassed. He laughed too and quickly corrected himself. He said that making mistakes like that was one of the best ways to learn because it made him pay attention to the details of the language. These personal stories are examples of how real-life experiences will teach you more than any textbook ever could. They show how important it is to immerse yourself in English, to practice speaking, and to build confidence. When you listen to real-life stories, like the ones I'm sharing with you today, you start to understand how English is used in different situations, and you start to pick up valuable phrases and expressions that you can use in your own conversations. So, if you're serious about improving your English, remember to keep practicing and stay engaged. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. Keep listening to real-life stories. Keep practicing speaking, and I promise you, your listening and speaking skills will improve. Now, let's go even deeper into how listening to real-life conversations and stories can help you improve not just your listening skills, but also your speaking ability. I know many of you struggle with understanding fast English or feel nervous when trying to speak. That's completely normal. Everyone who learns a new language faces these challenges, but the good news is that they can be overcome with the right approach. Let me take you back to another real-life experience of mine that taught me a lot about listening and speaking in English. A few years ago, I was staying in a shared apartment with 3 roommates, and they were all native English speakers. At first, I was excited because I thought, this is perfect. I'll be able to practice English every day. But soon, I realized that understanding them was much harder than I expected. Every evening, we would all sit in the living room and chat about our day. They would talk about work, funny things that happened, or make plans for the weekend. The problem was that they spoke so quickly, used slang, and sometimes even interrupted each other. I would sit there, listening carefully, but often I would only catch a few words from what they were saying. It felt frustrating because I wanted to join in, but I wasn't sure how to keep up. One night, one of my roommates, Daniel, told a joke that made everyone burst into laughter. I smiled along with them, but the truth was, I didn't fully understand the joke. It was about a TV show that I had never watched, and they used an idiom I had never heard before. Later that night, I looked up the meaning of that idiom and found out that it meant something completely different from what I had guessed. That's when I realized something important. Understanding spoken English isn't just about knowing words. It's also about knowing cultural references, common expressions, and even humor. After that experience, I made a change. Instead of just listening passively, I started asking questions. When someone said something I didn't understand, I would politely ask, "What does that mean?" Or, "Can you explain that phrase?" Most of the time, my roommates were happy to explain, and they would even give me more examples of how that word or phrase is used in real life. One day, Daniel told me, "Blake, you don't have to understand every single word. If you understand the main idea, that's enough to follow the conversation." That advice changed my perspective. Instead of trying to catch every single word, I started focusing on the general meaning of the conversation. I paid attention to people's facial expressions, their tone of voice, and the way they reacted to each other. I also started watching TV shows with subtitles, and then later, I watched the same shows without subtitles to test my understanding. Another interesting thing happened during that time. I realized that my speaking skills were also improving just by being around native speakers every day. Even though I wasn't speaking as much as I wanted to in the beginning, I was listening to how they formed their sentences, how they used certain words, and how they reacted in different situations. I started picking up phrases naturally, and I didn't even have to think about grammar rules anymore. It just started to come out more naturally. Let me share another personal experience that taught me the importance of listening in real-life situations. A few months after moving into that apartment, I had to go to a job interview. The job was at a local coffee shop, and I knew that I would have to interact with customers every day if I got hired. The interview was my first real test of speaking English in a professional setting, and I was nervous. When I walked into the interview room, the manager smiled and said, "So, tell me about yourself." At that moment, my brain froze for a second. I had practiced answering this question before, but suddenly my mind went blank. Instead of panicking, I took a deep breath and started talking. I told him about my background, my experience, and why I was interested in the job. I didn't speak perfectly, and I made a few small mistakes, but I noticed something important. The manager wasn't focused on my mistakes. He was more interested in my confidence and how well I communicated my ideas. Then he asked me a question I wasn't expecting. "Can you tell me about a time when you had to solve a problem?" I had to think quickly, so I told a story about a time when I helped a customer in my previous job. I focused on keeping my answer clear and natural. And to my surprise, he nodded and smiled as I spoke. After the interview, I walked out feeling proud of myself. Even though I wasn't perfect, I had successfully communicated my thoughts in English in a real-life situation. That job interview taught me a valuable lesson. Communication is not about being perfect. It's about being understood. If you can express your thoughts clearly and confidently, people will focus on your message, not your mistakes. This is why listening to real-life conversations is so important. When you listen to native speakers talking in natural situations, you get used to the way English is spoken in the real world. You learn which words are used in casual conversations, which phrases sound more formal, and how people express different emotions through their tone of voice. One thing that really helped me during that time was listening to conversations in different contexts. For example, I started listening to customer service calls, business meetings, and even casual phone conversations between friends. Each type of conversation had a different style of speaking. In business meetings, people spoke more formally and used polite language like, "I appreciate your time," or "Let's discuss this further." In casual conversations, people used more relaxed language like, "Hey, what's up?" or "That's awesome." Another technique that helped me was shadowing. If you haven't tried shadowing before, it's a powerful way to improve your listening and speaking skills at the same time. Here's how it works. You listen to a native speaker and try to repeat exactly what they say, copying their pronunciation, tone, and rhythm. You can do this with podcasts, TV shows, or even YouTube videos. At first, it's challenging because native speakers talk fast, but with practice, you'll start to get better at matching their speech. I remember doing this exercise with a scene from a movie. There was a conversation between two characters, and I kept replaying it, trying to repeat exactly what they said. At first, I struggled because the actors were speaking so quickly, but after a few tries, I started to catch the rhythm of their speech. I noticed where they paused, which words they stressed, and how their voices changed depending on their emotions. After practicing this for a few weeks, I noticed a big improvement in my speaking fluency. Now, I want you to think about your own experiences with listening and speaking in English. Have you ever been in a situation where you struggled to understand someone? Have you ever felt nervous about speaking because you were afraid of making mistakes? If you have, don't worry. You're not alone. Everyone who learns a language goes through these moments, but the important thing is to keep pushing forward. The best way to improve your English listening and speaking skills is to immerse yourself in real-life situations as much as possible. Surround yourself with English content, listen to different types of conversations, and practice speaking every day, even if it's just by yourself. If you can find a language partner, that's even better. But even if you don't have a language partner, you can still practice by talking to yourself, repeating phrases you hear, or even recording your voice and listening to it. I hope that my personal stories and experiences have given you some motivation to keep improving your English. Remember, listening is not just about hearing words. It's about understanding the message, the emotions, and the culture behind the language. The more you expose yourself to real-life conversations, the more confident and fluent you'll become. Another important thing I learned from my journey of improving my English was that real-life situations often push you to improve in ways you don't expect. Let me tell you about a time when I had to use my English skills in a situation that I wasn't prepared for. I was traveling to a new city for a short vacation. It was my first time visiting this place, and I was really excited to explore. I had planned everything carefully: where to stay, the places I wanted to visit, and even some restaurants that I wanted to try. But as we all know, travel doesn't always go as planned. On my second day there, I was walking around the city when I suddenly realized that my phone battery was almost dead. I checked my bag, and I had forgotten to bring my charger. I thought, no problem, I'll just buy one at a store nearby. I walked into an electronics shop and looked around, but I couldn't find the charger I needed. That's when I had to ask for help. I walked up to the salesperson and said, "Hi, I need a charger for my phone." He smiled and replied, "Sure. What kind of phone do you have?" At that moment, I completely forgot the exact name of my phone model. I tried to describe it by saying, "It's a black phone, and it's not too big, not too small." The salesperson laughed and said, "Okay, that doesn't really help much. Do you know if it's an Android or an iPhone?" I quickly realized my mistake. I was too vague in my description. I needed to be more specific. So I took my phone out of my pocket and showed it to him. He nodded and said, "Oh, I see. You need a USB-C charger." Now, that was a word I hadn't heard before, USB-C. I had heard of USB, but USB-C was new to me. Instead of just pretending I understood, I asked him, "What's the difference between a USB and USB-C?" He explained that USB-C was the newer type of charger used in most modern phones and laptops. I learned something new that day just by asking a simple question. This experience taught me an important lesson. Sometimes, when learning a language, you don't need to know everything in advance. You just need to be able to communicate the basic idea and be open to learning from the conversation itself. If I had panicked and stayed silent, I wouldn't have learned what a USB-C charger was. But by asking a question, I not only got what I needed, but also expanded my vocabulary in a natural way. Another real-life situation that helped me improve my English happened at a restaurant. I was meeting some friends for dinner at a place that I had never been to before. When I arrived, the waiter gave me the menu, and I noticed that some of the dishes had words I didn't understand. There were terms like sauté, braised, and glazed. I had seen these words before, but I wasn't completely sure what they meant in terms of food. Instead of guessing, I decided to ask the waiter. I pointed at one of the dishes and said, "Excuse me, what does braised mean?" The waiter smiled and explained, "Braised means that the food is cooked slowly in liquid so that it becomes really soft and flavorful." That was an aha moment for me. I had read the word braised before, but now I could actually connect it to a real description. Later, when my food arrived, I could see exactly what braised meant. It was soft, juicy, and full of flavor. This is why learning English through real experiences is so powerful. When you hear a word, see it in action, and then use it yourself, it sticks in your memory much better than just reading it in a textbook. That night at the restaurant, I also learned another useful phrase. When we finished eating, the waiter asked, "Would you like to see the dessert menu?" I wasn't really hungry, so I said, "No, I'm good, thank you." My friend, who was a native English speaker, turned to me and said, "That's a very natural way to decline something in English. Instead of just saying no, you can say, 'No, I'm good,' or 'No, I'm all set.'" That small moment stuck with me because I realized that learning English isn't just about understanding vocabulary, it's also about learning the little phrases that make conversations sound natural. Now, let's talk about another situation where listening skills can make a big difference: understanding directions. Have you ever been in a situation where you got lost and had to ask someone for help? I remember a time when I was trying to find a museum in a new city. I had a map on my phone, but for some reason the GPS wasn't working properly. So I walked up to a local and asked, "Excuse me, do you know where the city museum is?" The man nodded and started giving me directions. "Yeah, just go down this street, take a left at the traffic light, walk past the bank, and then take a right at the bakery. It should be right in front of you." He spoke quickly, and I only caught about half of what he said. But instead of panicking, I repeated what I understood back to him. So I go straight, turn left at the traffic light, and then I should see the museum after the bakery? He smiled and said, "Exactly." This experience taught me another valuable lesson. When you're listening to directions, repeating back what you understood is a great way to check if you got it right. Native speakers will usually confirm or correct you if you make a mistake. It also helps slow down the conversation and gives you a chance to process the information. This technique works in many different situations. If you're in a meeting at work and your boss gives you a task, you can repeat it back by saying, "So, just to confirm, you want me to finish the report by Friday and send it to you by email?" This not only helps you avoid misunderstandings, but also makes you sound more professional and confident. Another thing that really improved my listening skills was watching English-speaking TV shows and movies. But instead of just watching for fun, I made it an active learning exercise. I would pick a scene and watch it with subtitles first. Then I would watch the same scene again without subtitles and try to understand as much as possible. If I missed something, I would go back and listen again. One time I was watching a comedy show, and there was a scene where a character said, "That's the last straw." I didn't understand what he meant, so I paused the video and looked it up. I found out that the last straw is an idiom that means the final problem that makes someone lose their patience. The next day, I heard someone use this exact phrase in a real conversation, and I immediately understood it. That's the power of active listening. When you train your ears to recognize new words and phrases, you start to notice them everywhere. Another fun way to improve listening is by listening to songs in English. The first time I tried this, I picked a song that I liked and listened to it while reading the lyrics. I was surprised by how many words I'd been mishearing before. After a few listens, I tried singing along, which helped me practice pronunciation and rhythm. Some songs use informal language and slang, which is great for learning how native speakers really talk. Speaking of pronunciation, one of the biggest mistakes learners make is worrying too much about their accent. I used to be very self-conscious about my accent when speaking English. I thought that if I didn't sound like a native speaker, people wouldn't understand me. But over time, I realized that pronunciation is about clarity, not perfection. Even native speakers have different accents. A friend once told me, "As long as people understand you, your accent doesn't matter." That advice gave me the confidence to focus on clear speech rather than trying to sound exactly like a native speaker. The key is to practice speaking every day, even if it's just for a few minutes. Reading out loud, shadowing native speakers, and even recording yourself can all help improve pronunciation and fluency. Now, think about your own experiences with listening and speaking in English. Have you ever been in a situation where you struggled to understand someone? Have you ever felt nervous about speaking because you were afraid of making mistakes? If so, remember that every mistake is an opportunity to learn. Keep practicing, keep listening, and most importantly, keep speaking. I remember when I first moved to a bustling city to work on my English. The city was full of life, noise, and conversations happening everywhere. On my very first day, I boarded a crowded bus during rush hour. The bus driver, a friendly lady named Susan, greeted everyone with a cheerful "Good morning," and the passengers responded with quick nods and murmurs of thanks. I tried to follow along, but the noise, the overlapping voices, and the rapid fire conversation among the passengers left me overwhelmed. I couldn't catch every word, and I felt lost in a sea of accents and slang. Instead of giving in to frustration, I decided to see this as an opportunity to challenge my listening skills. I began to focus on the tone and rhythm of the conversation rather than every single word. Slowly, I started to pick up common greetings and expressions like, "How's it going?" and "Have a good day." Although I missed some details, I learned that understanding the overall message is more important than catching every word. This experience taught me that exposure to varied and noisy environments can be a powerful tool for learning how English is naturally spoken. On another occasion, I found myself at a local community center hosting a language exchange event. I was paired with Maria, a native speaker with a gentle and patient manner. We sat down with cups of coffee and began talking about our daily routines. Maria explained her morning ritual, and as she spoke, I noticed how she emphasized certain words and used pauses to indicate new ideas. She said, "I always start my day with a quiet moment. Then I head out to the market." I listened carefully, and although I didn't catch every detail at first, I asked her to repeat phrases and slowly built a mental picture of her routine. I found that asking for clarification wasn't a sign of weakness. Rather, it was a bridge to better understanding. Maria even took the time to explain the meaning of expressions like quiet moment and head out, which deepened my understanding of how casual speech is structured. That evening, as I practiced speaking about my own morning habits, I used phrases like, "I wake up early," and "I get ready for work," gradually incorporating the natural flow of conversation that I had observed. This exchange not only improved my listening, but also boosted my confidence in speaking in everyday settings. There was another memorable incident that happened during a rainy afternoon in a small town. I had planned to visit a local art gallery, and on my way there, I encountered an unexpected downpour. With no umbrella in sight, I dashed into a nearby cafe to take shelter. The cafe was warm and cozy, filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and soft background music. Inside, I noticed a group of locals discussing their favorite paintings and the artists behind them. I couldn't help but listen in, trying to catch the nuances of their conversation. One gentleman named Robert mentioned, "This piece is a reflection of our town's history. It's like the art speaks to you." His voice carried passion and a touch of mystery, and the way he described the painting made me curious about the connection between art and personal experience. I later struck up a conversation with him, and he explained that by actively engaging with art and listening to different perspectives, one can develop a deeper understanding of language and emotion. That afternoon, as I sat with a cup of coffee and listened to more conversations around me, I learned not only new vocabulary related to art, but also expressions that conveyed feelings and opinions. Phrases like "a reflection of our history" or "the art speaks to you" enriched my vocabulary in ways that textbooks never could. I realized that real-life conversations often carry layers of meaning, and listening actively allows you to appreciate the subtle beauty of language. One evening, I attended a community storytelling night at a local library. People from different backgrounds gathered to share personal anecdotes, and the atmosphere was charged with emotion and authenticity. A woman named Linda began her story by saying, "I remember the day I lost my job. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet." Her story was filled with vivid imagery and expressions that painted a picture of despair and eventual hope. I was captivated by the way she used metaphors to describe her experience. Later, during a break, I approached her to ask what she meant by "the ground had shifted beneath my feet." Linda explained that this expression is used to describe a sudden and unexpected change that leaves you feeling unstable. I was fascinated by how such simple phrases could carry so much meaning. After that night, I started listening to more storytelling podcasts and watching interviews with people sharing their life experiences. Each story taught me different ways to express feelings and thoughts, and I began incorporating these expressions into my daily conversations. I would often practice by narrating small events from my day, trying to mimic the expressive style I had observed. This practice made my speaking more engaging and helped me understand how intonation and emotion play a critical role in communication. Another transformative experience happened during my first week at a new job. I was assigned to a project team with colleagues from various parts of the country. One day, during a team meeting, our manager, Carol, outlined a new strategy using several business idioms. She said, "We need to hit the ground running, think outside the box, and get all our ducks in a row." Initially, these expressions confused me because I wasn't familiar with them. I knew the literal meanings of the words, but as a whole, they conveyed a message that was completely different from their individual parts. After the meeting, I approached Carol and admitted that I wasn't sure I fully understood what she meant. Carol patiently explained that hit the ground running means to start a project energetically, think outside the box means to be creative, and get all our ducks in a row means to organize everything properly. This moment was eye-opening. I realized that idioms and expressions are common in everyday work environments and are key to sounding natural in conversation. To further improve my skills, I began keeping a small notebook where I wrote down idioms and their meanings, along with examples of how they were used in conversation. Every day, I reviewed these notes and practiced using the phrases in sentences. Over time, my comfort level with these expressions grew, and I found that I could understand and even use them in meetings and casual conversations. This practice not only enhanced my listening skills, but also boosted my confidence in speaking clearly and naturally at work. My journey also took me to a lively neighborhood market, where I had another opportunity to challenge my listening skills. The market was a colorful mix of sounds, vendors calling out their offers, customers haggling, and children laughing as they ran around. I stopped by a stall selling fresh fruits and vegetables, and the vendor, a cheerful man named Carlos, greeted me with a hearty, "Hola, amigo! How can I help you today?" Although his greeting was friendly, I noticed that he quickly switched to fast-paced English when describing his produce. He said things like, "These oranges are fresh from the grove, bursting with flavor and priced to move quickly." I found myself trying to piece together the adjectives and qualifiers he used to describe his goods. To ensure I understood, I asked him to slow down a bit, and he obliged with a smile. He repeated, "Fresh from the grove, bursting with flavor, and priced to move quickly." And I repeated the phrases back to him. This simple exchange made a huge difference. It was a real-time exercise in active listening and confirmation. I also learned that in a noisy, busy environment like a market, repeating back what you hear is an excellent strategy to ensure clear communication. By doing so, not only do you verify that you have understood correctly, but you also give yourself the chance to internalize new vocabulary and expressions. Another strategy that I found incredibly useful was joining online discussion groups and forums focused on English learning. In one of these groups, I met a fellow learner named Sarah who shared her daily challenges with pronunciation and comprehension. We began a small challenge where we would record short audio clips of ourselves describing our day, then exchange recordings and give each other feedback. Sarah would often point out that sometimes I pronounced words too quickly, making it hard to follow. In return, I helped her with understanding natural contractions and the connected speech that native speakers use. For example, instead of saying, "I am going to the store," in a very deliberate manner, native speakers often say, "I'm going to go to the store." Practicing these subtle shifts in speech helped us both sound more natural. Our exchange was not just about correcting mistakes. It was about learning to appreciate the beauty of natural speech, where every contraction and pause has meaning. We celebrated small victories, like the day Sarah confidently used a new idiom in a conversation, or when I finally mastered the rhythm of a particularly challenging sentence. These collaborative experiences taught me that learning English is not a solitary endeavor. It's a shared journey where every conversation, every exchange, is a step toward greater fluency. I also began to incorporate storytelling into my practice sessions. Storytelling is a powerful way to learn because it forces you to structure your thoughts, use varied vocabulary, and maintain the listener's interest. I started by keeping a daily journal in English, where I wrote about my experiences, feelings, and observations. One entry described a particularly hectic day when I had to juggle multiple tasks at work while dealing with unexpected interruptions. I wrote about how I felt overwhelmed at first, but then I found that breaking down my tasks into smaller, manageable parts helped me regain control. As I narrated this story in my journal, I consciously chose phrases that reflected my emotions, such as "I was drowning in a sea of deadlines," or "Each small success lit up my day like a beacon." Later, when I shared these stories in conversation groups, I received feedback on how vivid and relatable they were. This process of crafting and sharing personal narratives not only boosted my confidence in speaking, but also deepened my understanding of how language can convey complex feelings and ideas. A particularly transformative moment came during a weekend workshop on effective communication. The workshop leader, James, was an expert in body language and tone modulation. He demonstrated how subtle changes in your voice or a slight pause could change the entire meaning of a sentence. During one exercise, he asked everyone to repeat a sentence in different emotional tones. I tried saying, "I'm really happy about this opportunity," in a cheerful tone, then in a neutral tone, and finally in a more reserved, thoughtful tone. It was fascinating to see how the same words could evoke different responses depending on the delivery. James explained that this skill is vital for both speaking and listening, because it allows you to pick up on the emotional undercurrents in conversations. For me, this workshop was a turning point. I realized that effective communication is as much about how you say something as what you say. I started paying closer attention to the emotional cues in conversations, how a slight change in pitch or a pause could signal excitement, hesitation, or even sarcasm. Over time, this awareness improved my ability to interpret the meaning behind the words I heard and to choose my own words. I've come to see that every interaction, no matter how brief, is a chance to learn something new. Whether I'm in a bustling market, a quiet cafe, or an important meeting, each conversation offers insights into how English is used in different contexts. For instance, during a family reunion a few years ago, I observed how older relatives communicated using a mix of formal and informal language. My cousin, Ethan, who had spent years living abroad, would switch effortlessly between a relaxed conversational tone and a more precise, measured way of speaking when discussing serious topics. I learned that this flexibility in speaking comes from a deep understanding of the language's rhythm and structure, something that only comes with extensive listening and real-life practice. I started recording snippets of our conversations on my phone, with their permission, of course, and listened to them later. This helped me pick out the subtle differences in tone and word choice in various contexts, deepening my understanding of when to use formal language versus informal language. Another unforgettable experience occurred during a volunteer project. In a diverse neighborhood center, I was part of a team organizing a cultural fair, and my role involved coordinating with speakers, local artists, and community leaders. The event was a melting pot of languages and dialects, and while English was the common language, the speed and style of communication varied greatly. I recall one particular conversation with a volunteer coordinator named Raj, who spoke rapidly with a mix of English and expressions from his native language. Raj explained the schedule for the fair, saying, "We're kicking off at 9 sharp, then we'll move on to the performance, followed by the workshop sessions, and finally, we'll have a closing ceremony that wraps up the day nicely." I found it challenging at first to keep track of all the details, so I asked Raj to slow down and repeat the schedule. He patiently repeated it, and I confirmed the details back to him. This process of asking for repetition and clarification not only ensured that I got the information right, but also trained me to listen more carefully to the flow of speech. Over the course of the event, I became more adept at catching nuances, and even started anticipating what information would come next, which made communication smoother and more effective. In my ongoing journey, I also discovered that active listening extends beyond face-to-face interactions. Online platforms have become an incredible resource for learning. I began following several podcasts and YouTube channels where native speakers discussed a variety of topics, from technology and science to culture and personal development. One of my favorites was a podcast called Everyday English Stories, where the hosts shared their daily experiences in a relaxed, conversational style. I found that listening to these podcasts during my commute not only helped me understand different accents and speeds of speech, but also introduced me to new vocabulary and idiomatic expressions that are part of everyday English. I would pause the podcasts occasionally, replay challenging sections, and mimic the pronunciation and intonation. This exercise, known as shadowing, was extremely helpful. I learned to match the natural flow of native speakers and gradually improved both my listening and speaking skills in tandem. During one particular podcast episode, the host described a scenario where he got lost in a foreign city and had to rely solely on his listening skills to navigate. He said, "When you're lost, every word can be a clue. Every pause, a hint. It's like piecing together a puzzle where each conversation leads you closer to your destination." That vivid description resonated with me, and it reminded me of another time I had a similar experience. I was traveling in a country where English was not the first language for most people. Despite the language barrier, I managed to find my way by carefully listening to the locals, observing their gestures, and piecing together the directions they gave me. I learned that even when the language is not perfectly understood, context, body language, and tone can provide powerful hints to the intended message. This experience underscored the importance of looking beyond words. Listening involves absorbing the entire context of a conversation. I began practicing this skill by watching documentaries and travel videos where the narrative wasn't just in the words, but also in the visual cues and background sounds. This holistic approach to listening has made me more attentive and responsive in conversations, whether I'm engaging in small talk or discussing more complex topics. Alongside these experiences, I also devoted time to learning through structured activities such as language games and role-playing scenarios. I remember organizing a role-play session with a group of friends where we simulated a situation at an airport. In this role-play, one person played the role of a nervous traveler, another a helpful airport staff member, and the rest of us acted as fellow passengers. We recreated situations like lost luggage, delayed flights, and language mix-ups at check-in. I played the role of the traveler who had lost his boarding pass. In the scenario, I had to explain my problem in clear, simple terms and ask for help. The airport staff member responded with a series of questions and instructions, and I had to repeat and confirm the information to ensure I understood correctly. This exercise was both fun and challenging. It pushed me to think on my feet, use polite language, and clarify details in real time. After the role play, we discussed what phrases worked well, which ones were confusing, and how we could improve our interactions. These sessions not only strengthened my vocabulary and fluency, but also prepared me for the unpredictable nature of real-life conversations. In addition to role-playing, I started incorporating listening challenges into my daily routine. One effective method was setting aside time each day to listen to short audio clips or segments of interviews then summarizing what I had heard in my own words. For example, I listened to an interview with a renowned chef who spoke about the cultural significance of food. I jotted down key points, expressions, and even noted the way the chef's tone shifted when he mentioned nostalgic memories from his childhood. After listening, I would try to retell the story to a friend or record myself summarizing the content. This practice reinforced my understanding of the material and highlighted areas where my listening needed improvement. Sometimes I discovered that I had missed out on details that were crucial for understanding the full context, so I would replay the clip and focus on those parts. This iterative process of listening, summarizing, and re-listening has been incredibly effective. It has taught me that repetition and active engagement with the content are essential for mastering the nuances of spoken English. One of the most surprising lessons I learned on this journey was the value of silence and pauses in communication. There was a conversation I had with a teacher named Henry during a break at a language workshop. Henry explained that in many cultures, silence is not a void but a space filled with meaning. He said, "A pause in conversation can give you time to think, process, and even build anticipation for what comes next." I recalled a time during a business meeting when a long pause made me feel anxious because I wasn't sure if I was expected to speak. Later, I learned that the pause was intentional, a moment for everyone to reflect on the discussion before moving on. Since then, I've embraced pauses both in listening and speaking. I now allow myself a moment to think before answering questions, which not only helps me formulate clearer responses, but also gives me time to catch any parts of the conversation I might have missed. I've noticed that when I slow down my speech, my listeners find it easier to follow along, and I feel more in control of the conversation. Another vivid memory that comes to mind is when I participated in a cultural potluck dinner organized by a local community center. People from various cultural backgrounds gathered to share their favorite dishes, and the conversations flowed naturally about traditions, family recipes, and the meaning of certain foods in their lives. I sat with a group of friends who were eager to share stories about their heritage. One elderly man named George spoke slowly and clearly about the history behind a traditional dish he was serving. As he recounted his story, he used expressions like "back in the day" and "it reminds me of my youth," which gave me insight into how language can evoke nostalgia and a sense of identity. I found myself asking follow-up questions about his experiences, and George was more than happy to elaborate. This conversation not only enriched my vocabulary with cultural expressions, but also taught me the importance of listening with empathy. I realized that effective communication involves understanding the person behind the words, their emotions, and their background. In that moment, I was not just learning English. I was connecting with someone's life story, and that made the language come alive in a way that no classroom ever could. In another instance, I was invited to a local book club meeting. The club's focus was on discussing contemporary novels, and the conversations were dynamic and filled with passionate debates about themes, character development, and narrative styles. I remember one discussion about a character who said, "I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders." This phrase intrigued me, and I later learned that it is an idiom used to describe someone who is under a lot of stress or responsibility. The book club members discussed not just the literal meaning of the words, but the emotional impact of the phrase and how it related to the character's struggles. Engaging in this discussion taught me that listening carefully to how people analyze and interpret language can broaden your understanding of its subtleties. I started to pay more attention to figurative language and idiomatic expressions in my reading and listening. This practice has helped me recognize that English is not just a set of rules, but a living, breathing medium that evolves with the people who speak it. I also found that learning through humor has a significant impact on improving language skills. I recall attending a comedy night at a small theater where the comedian Kevin used humor to address everyday frustrations and quirks of modern life. His jokes were filled with wordplay, puns, and clever twists of phrase. At first, I struggled to understand some of the jokes because they relied on cultural references and fast-paced delivery. However, I decided to embrace the challenge. I listened closely, rewound the audio later on my phone, and tried to catch every nuance of his performance. Gradually, I began to appreciate the humor and even started to understand the underlying expressions. I later tried to use some of his phrases during casual conversations, and it brought smiles and laughter from my friends. Humor, I learned, is a universal language that bridges gaps between different cultures and language backgrounds. It not only makes learning fun, but also deepens your understanding of timing, delivery, and the playful side of English. Throughout all these experiences, one recurring theme stands out: the importance of persistence and a positive attitude. There were days when I felt discouraged because I couldn't understand a conversation or felt that my accent was too thick. But every time I encountered a challenge, I reminded myself that every mistake is a chance to learn something new. I kept a mental note to celebrate even the smallest victories: a new word learned, a conversation that went smoothly, or even a moment when I confidently asked for clarification. These small wins accumulated over time and transformed my approach to learning. I began to see challenges not as setbacks, but as opportunities to grow and adapt. In addition to these everyday encounters, I also made it a habit to revisit recordings of my conversations and practice sessions. I would sit in a quiet space, listen to my own voice, and note areas where I could improve. Sometimes I realized that I was speaking too fast or that my intonation did not match the intended emotion. I practiced by slowing down my speech and deliberately enunciating words. I also compared my recordings to those of native speakers and tried to mimic their rhythm and pacing. This self-reflection was challenging, but incredibly rewarding. It taught me that improvement comes from honest self-assessment and continuous practice. As I continued to immerse myself in diverse environments, I began to notice a remarkable change. My ability to switch between different types of conversations became more natural. I could move from a casual chat with a neighbor to a formal discussion in a meeting without losing my sense of clarity and coherence. I realized that the more I listened and engaged with native speakers, the more my own speech started to mirror the natural flow of the language. I learned to use contractions, idioms, and even a touch of humor in my speech, all of which made my English sound more authentic. I encourage you to seek out similar experiences in your own life. Look for opportunities to step out of your comfort zone, whether it's joining a local club, participating in community events, or simply striking up a conversation with a stranger. Each interaction, no matter how small, is a chance to learn and improve. When you find yourself in a conversation that feels overwhelming, take a deep breath and focus on the context. Ask for clarification when needed, and repeat back what you understood. Over time, you will notice that your listening skills sharpen and your confidence in speaking grows. Consider setting aside a dedicated time each day for focused listening practice. This could be as simple as tuning into a favorite podcast during your commute or watching a TV show in English without relying on subtitles. Challenge yourself to identify key phrases and new vocabulary, and then practice using them in your own sentences. It might feel daunting at first, but consistency is key. The more you expose yourself to authentic language, the more natural it will become. Another approach that has helped me immensely is engaging with language learning communities online. I joined several forums and social media groups where learners and native speakers discuss everyday topics. In these communities, I found a safe space to ask questions, share my progress, and even receive constructive feedback on my speaking. One of the most valuable lessons I learned from fellow community members was that learning is a shared experience. We celebrated each other's successes, helped one another overcome obstacles, and together we built a supportive environment that made the process both enjoyable and effective. Moreover, exploring different genres and topics has broadened my linguistic horizons. I ventured into areas that were completely new to me: science, technology, art, and even sports commentary. Each field has its own set of jargon and expressions, and by listening to experts in these areas, I was able to expand my vocabulary and learn the appropriate context for each term. For example, listening to the sports commentators taught me not only the names of various plays and techniques, but also the excitement and rapid pace of live commentary. I began to understand how passion and precision can coexist in a single sentence. As you continue your journey, try to adopt a mindset of curiosity. Every conversation is a learning opportunity. Don't be afraid to ask questions like, "What does this phrase mean?" Or, "How do you pronounce this word?" Most native speakers are more than happy to help, and these small inquiries can lead to big breakthroughs in understanding. I've had countless moments where a simple question opened up a whole new area of language that I had never considered before. In one memorable instance, while discussing travel experiences with a friend, I asked, "What do you mean by off the beaten path?" The explanation I received not only clarified the phrase, but also enriched my vocabulary with other similar expressions such as hidden gem and less traveled route. I also made it a point to document these discoveries. I maintained a digital journal on my phone where I recorded new expressions, interesting phrases, and even snippets of conversations that I found particularly engaging. Reviewing these notes before bed or during quiet moments helped reinforce what I had learned. Over time, I built up a personal lexicon of phrases that I could recall during conversations. This practice has proven invaluable, especially when I'm in a situation where I need to express complex ideas quickly. In many ways, learning English has become an adventure, a never-ending journey filled with surprises, challenges, and moments of triumph. Every day, I find new layers in the language, whether it's through a casual conversation in a cafe or an in-depth discussion during a business meeting. The key is to remain open, curious, and persistent. As you listen to real-life stories and engage with authentic conversations, you'll find that your own way of speaking evolves naturally. You'll begin to use expressions effortlessly, understand subtle jokes, and even appreciate the poetic cadence of everyday language. I invite you to experiment with these techniques in your daily routine. Try listening to different types of content, join language exchange events, record your own voice, and most importantly, don't shy away from making mistakes. Every error is a stepping stone toward fluency. Embrace the process and remember that improvement comes with time and consistent effort. There will be moments of confusion, and that's perfectly normal. Each challenge you overcome builds your resilience and enriches your command of the language. As you practice, consider sharing your progress with others who are on the same journey. Find a partner or a group where you can discuss what you've learned, share your recordings, and offer each other feedback. The encouragement and collective wisdom from fellow learners can be incredibly motivating and can help you see your own progress more clearly. It's a reminder that you are not alone in this journey. Let's continue our deep dive into mastering English listening and speaking with even more detailed experiences, practical techniques, and personal reflections. Imagine this as a long journey through everyday situations, unexpected challenges, and delightful surprises that come with engaging in authentic English conversations. I remember a time when I visited a bustling international conference where speakers came from all over the world. The room was filled with diverse accents, rapid-fire exchanges, and a mix of technical and casual language. I was both excited and anxious because I wanted to follow every discussion and contribute my thoughts. During one panel discussion, a Ichi speaker named Olivia shared her insights on technology and innovation. She explained, "The key is to adapt quickly, learn from mistakes, and build on small successes." I focused on her clear enunciation and the natural pauses she used to emphasize her points. Despite the technical jargon, her use of simple phrases like "learn from mistakes" and "small successes" resonated with me, making the advanced concepts accessible. Later, during a Q&A session, I mustered the courage to ask a question about one of her points. I repeated part of her answer in my own words to confirm my understanding, and the panelists appreciated my effort to clarify. This experience showed me that even in high-level discussions, the fundamentals of active listening, such as noting tone, context, and key phrases, are essential in bridging the gap between complex ideas and everyday language. Another memorable episode happened during a long train ride across a scenic countryside. I found myself seated next to an elderly gentleman named George, who loved to share stories from his youth. As the train chugged along, he described his adventures during the early days of his career. He said things like, "Back when I was young, we didn't have fancy gadgets, and every conversation meant a real connection." His language was simple, yet full of life, and his stories were sprinkled with idioms such as "time flies" and "a stitch in time saves 9." I listened carefully and asked him to explain a few phrases that were unfamiliar to me. For instance, when he said "a stitch in time saves 9, he explained that it meant fixing a small problem early on prevents it from becoming a bigger one. His explanation was so clear that it immediately clicked for me. We spent the rest of the journey discussing other idioms and expressions, and I jotted down notes in my small notebook. That train ride wasn't just a mode of transportation, it was a moving classroom that enriched my understanding of natural speech and the cultural context behind everyday expressions. In another part of my life, I had an opportunity to volunteer at a local community center where various language classes were held. I decided to participate in a language cafe session where people gathered to speak in English while enjoying snacks and casual conversation. I met Sarah, a fellow learner who was determined to overcome her hesitation when speaking. During one of our conversations, Sarah told me about her daily routine, saying, "Every morning I wake up early, make a strong cup of coffee, and then I head out to see the sunrise." Her description was vivid and full of imagery, and it helped me understand how simple, everyday activities could be transformed into engaging narratives with the right choice of words. We both practiced repeating each other's sentences to work on pronunciation and rhythm. At times, we would pause to discuss why certain words sounded more natural than others. For example, instead of saying, "I go to work by bus" in a formal tone, we practiced saying, "I catch the bus to work," which felt more colloquial and lively. Our friendly exchanges allowed us to experiment with language in a supportive environment, reinforcing that every conversation is a chance to learn and grow. One afternoon, I attended a workshop on effective communication hosted by a renowned speaking coach named Daniel. The workshop was interactive, with exercises designed to help us understand the power of intonation, stress, and pauses in conversation. Daniel encouraged us to share personal stories and then analyze the way we delivered them. I remember reading a short story about a challenging day at work, and Daniel guided us to pay attention to our tone, how a slight change in pitch could turn a simple statement into a passionate expression of emotion. He demonstrated by saying, "I was overwhelmed by the workload," first in a monotone voice, and then with genuine feeling by stressing "overwhelmed" and adding a pause before "by the workload." His example showed that the emotional weight of a sentence can be communicated not only by the words chosen, but also by how those words are spoken. We practiced mimicking his style, and I found that by recording my attempts and comparing them to his, I could identify areas where my natural intonation needed improvement. This exercise was invaluable because it merged listening skills with speaking practice, enabling me to internalize the subtleties of natural speech. I also discovered that engaging with different forms of media can further expand your understanding of English in various contexts. I began to explore audiobooks, where the narrator's expressive delivery brought stories to life. One audiobook, in particular, featured a narrator with a warm, engaging voice who would pause at just the right moments, allowing the listener to absorb the details and emotions behind the narrative. While listening, I would pause the recording to repeat sentences out loud, trying to mirror the narrator's rhythm and expression. This shadowing technique, as I learned, is a powerful way to improve pronunciation and fluency. Over time, I noticed that the speed at which I spoke became more natural, and I was able to incorporate new vocabulary and phrases effortlessly into my own conversations. Travel experiences have been another rich source of language learning for me. On one trip to a coastal town, I encountered a fisherman named Tom who spent his mornings at the docks. His language was simple, yet vivid. He would say, "The sea has its own rhythm, and every tide tells a story." Intrigued by his poetic description, I asked him to elaborate on what he meant by "every tide tells a story." Tom explained that just as the tide changes every day, so do the moods and fortunes of those who depend on the sea for their livelihood. His words painted a picture of the dynamic relationship between nature and life, and I was fascinated by how such expressions could convey deep meaning in just a few words. I started incorporating similar descriptive language when I shared my own travel experiences with friends, and I found that it made my stories more engaging and relatable. Back in a more everyday setting, I recall a simple yet enlightening experience at a local grocery store. I was browsing the aisles when I overheard a conversation between a cashier and a regular customer. The customer said, "I always come here because the produce is fresh and the staff make me feel at home." I wasn't expecting such warmth in a routine interaction, and it prompted me to think about how language can be used to create a sense of community. I struck up a conversation with the cashier, whose name was Linda, and asked her about the store's history and how she developed such a friendly rapport with customers. Linda explained that the owner had always emphasized the importance of personal connections, encouraging everyone to treat each other like family. This conversation not only expanded my vocabulary with words like rapport and community, but also gave me insight into how language builds trust and familiarity. I left the store that day with a new appreciation for the power of small talk and everyday interactions. In another instance, I participated in a language exchange meetup at a local park. I was paired with a native English speaker named Mark, who was enthusiastic about discussing topics ranging from current events to personal hobbies. We sat on a bench under a large oak tree, and Mark began by describing his recent experience of hiking in the mountains. He said, "Hiking is not just about physical exercise. It's a journey that connects you with nature and your inner self." I listened intently as he elaborated on how each step on the trail brought him a sense of calm and clarity. His use of metaphors and descriptive language was not only captivating, but also instructive. I asked him to explain some of the expressions he used, such as "connects you with nature" and "inner self," so I could better understand how to use them in my own storytelling. Mark patiently broke down his sentences, highlighting how context and tone can transform a simple statement into an evocative expression. We spent over an hour discussing various topics, from the beauty of natural landscapes to the challenges of urban life, And by the end of the meetup, I felt significantly more confident in my ability to both listen actively and contribute meaningfully to a conversation. Another key aspect of my language learning journey has been the willingness to ask for feedback. After a group discussion at a local community center, I approached a friendly participant named Jasmine. I said, "I'm trying to improve my English speaking skills. Could you tell me if there are any parts of my conversation that are hard to understand?" Jasmine appreciated my openness and offered gentle suggestions, such as slowing down a bit when speaking or enunciating certain words more clearly. Her constructive feedback was encouraging because it came from someone who had observed my interactions in real time. We agreed to meet regularly for short practice sessions, where we would discuss topics ranging from simple daily routines to more complex issues like cultural differences and social challenges. These sessions became a cherished part of my routine, and I learned that the willingness to receive feedback and make adjustments is a vital part of improving both listening and speaking skills. I also explored the power of storytelling by joining an online forum where people shared their personal experiences in English. One thread featured a user recounting a dramatic weather event, a sudden, intense thunderstorm that turned an ordinary day into an adventure. The storyteller described how the wind howled like a pack of wild dogs, and the raindrops pounded on, the roof as if dancing to nature's own rhythm. Reading that narrative, I was struck by how vivid language could transform a natural occurrence into an emotional journey. I began to write down my own experiences, trying to capture not just the facts, but also the emotions, the sounds, and the sensations. I posted a story about a time when I got caught in a light rain while on a morning walk, and I received encouraging comments from fellow learners who appreciated the imagery and clarity of my descriptions. This exchange of stories reinforced the idea that language is not just about another transformative practice was participating in debates and discussions on social media groups dedicated to language learning. In one group, members discussed current events, and I found myself both learning new vocabulary and understanding diverse perspectives. For example, during a discussion about environmental issues, I encountered phrases like carbon footprint, sustainable development, and renewable energy. Although these terms were technical, the conversation was conducted in everyday language, making it easier to grasp their meaning through context. I actively contributed by summarizing points and asking for clarification when needed. This not only improved my comprehension, but also taught me how to express my opinions clearly and respectfully. The process of reading, listening, and then contributing to these discussions made me realize that learning English is a dynamic exchange, a back and forth that builds mutual understanding and shared knowledge. I've also learned that effective communication isn't just about spoken words. It often involves visual cues and body language that enhance understanding. In a workshop I attended on nonverbal communication, we practiced exercises where we had to express feelings using only facial expressions and gestures. One exercise involved a scenario where a friend had to convey surprise and excitement without uttering a single word. I observed how slight changes in my eyebrows, a wide smile, or an open gesture could convey emotions more powerfully than words alone. Later, I applied these observations in conversations, finding that a well-timed gesture or a friendly smile could bridge gaps when words failed me. This holistic approach to communication taught me that listening is not merely an auditory process. It is a full-body experience that involves interpreting visual signals, tone, and even silence. In another engaging experience, I decided to explore regional dialects and slang by watching local news broadcasts and regional TV shows from different parts of the English-speaking world. I noticed that phrases and expressions varied significantly from one region to another, In one program, a host from the American South used expressions like fixin' to, meaning about to, and y'all, a plural form of you, which were completely new to me. I made it a habit to note these regional expressions and their contexts, asking native speakers in the comments section or during language exchange meetups about their usage. Over time, I started using some of these expressions appropriately in conversations, which not only made my language richer, but also allowed me to connect with people from various backgrounds. This exploration of dialects broadened my understanding of how dynamic and diverse English can be, and it reinforced the idea that learning the language involves embracing its many variations. There was also a period when I dedicated time to focused pronunciation practice, using online resources and interactive tools. I would choose a particular sound or word that I found challenging, then listen to native speakers using that sound in different contexts. For example, I practiced the difference between ship and sheep by listening to minimal pairs and repeating them until my mouth could distinguish the subtle differences. I recorded myself and compared my pronunciation to the original audio. These sessions were sometimes frustrating, but I soon discovered that the improvement was incremental and consistent practice paid off. Gradually, I found myself pronouncing words more accurately and with greater confidence. This systematic approach to pronunciation, combined with active listening and speaking practice, became a cornerstone of my daily language routine. Additionally, I began using apps that offered real-time feedback on my speaking. These apps allowed me to have conversations with virtual characters or record my voice and then receive suggestions on how to improve clarity and fluency. I spent several weeks engaging with these digital tools, and I found that they complemented my in-person practice quite well. By comparing the app's feedback with the suggestions I received from language partners and friends, I built a more comprehensive understanding of my strengths and areas for improvement. This multifaceted approach, combining technology with real-life interactions, enabled me to accelerate my learning process and become more adaptable in various conversational contexts. Another fascinating aspect of my journey has been learning how to deal with misunderstandings in real time. There were many instances when I would mishear a word or phrase, which sometimes led to humorous situations. For example, during a casual dinner with a group of friends, I once misinterpreted a comment about spicy food as spicy mood. The mix-up led to a lighthearted conversation about the differences between literal and figurative language, and we all laughed about it. These moments of misunderstanding, rather than being discouraging, became valuable learning opportunities. They taught me to ask clarifying questions, to repeat what I had heard, and to be comfortable with not understanding everything perfectly the first time. In these situations, I realized that the focus should be on communication, rather than perfection. Each misunderstanding became a stepping stone toward becoming a more effective listener and speaker. One long afternoon, I decided to attend an open mic event at a local cafe where people shared poetry, short stories, and personal reflections. The diversity of topics was astounding, ranging from humorous anecdotes about daily mishaps to profound musings about life and identity. I listened to a young poet, Emily, who recited a piece about overcoming fear. Her delivery was soft yet confident, and she used simple language to convey deep emotions. I was particularly impressed by the way she paused between lines, allowing the meaning of her words to sink in. After her performance, I approached her to ask about her technique. Emily explained that she practiced by recording herself and listening carefully to the gaps and inflections in her speech. She said, "Sometimes the silence between words is as powerful as the words themselves." Her insight resonated with me and further reinforced my belief that listening is an art that goes far beyond mere auditory processing. It's about feeling the emotion behind the words and appreciating the space that gives them meaning. During this period, I also made a habit of attending language meetups in different cultural settings. In one such meetup held at a community center, participants were invited to share stories about their cultural heritage and family traditions. I listened to a gentleman named Raj, who talked about his experience celebrating a traditional festival back home. He described the sounds of drums, the rhythmic chanting, and the communal spirit that filled the air. His narrative was not only rich in cultural detail, but also filled with expressions that were both unique and deeply meaningful. I asked Raj to share more about phrases he used to describe these experiences, and he explained that celebration, in his language, encompassed both joy and remembrance. Our conversation lasted for over an hour, and I left feeling that I had learned not just a few new words, but an entire cultural perspective that enriched my understanding of how language connects us to our roots and to each other. I've also engaged in numerous one-on-one conversations with language tutors who specialize in conversational English. One tutor, Mark, had a unique approach where he would simulate real-life scenarios, ordering at a restaurant, asking for directions, negotiating prices at a market, and then provide immediate feedback on how natural my responses sounded. In one simulation, I played the role of a customer at a busy diner, trying to order a meal while the background noise was deliberately played at a higher volume. Mark challenged me to focus on the most important words in the order and to repeat key phrases until they felt natural. By the end of the session, I felt much more confident in handling similar situations in real life. Mark's methods taught me that effective communication often depends on prioritizing clarity and context over perfect grammar. The emphasis on practical, real-world applications made the learning process both engaging and immediately useful. Furthermore, I began to explore the interplay between written and spoken English by writing down dialogues that I had overheard in everyday settings, a conversation in a cafe, banter among colleagues at work, or even the lyrical exchanges in a movie. I would then practice reading these dialogues aloud, experimenting with different tones and inflections until they felt genuine. This exercise not only improved my pronunciation and fluency, but also enhanced my ability to capture the natural cadence of spoken English. I started to notice patterns in how people structure their sentences in conversation, such as the tendency to use contractions and to omit certain words that are implied by context. These insights allowed me to bridge the gap between formal written language and informal spoken language, making my own speech sound more fluid and authentic. In one particularly enriching experience, I attended a seminar on cultural expressions where speakers from various backgrounds discussed the idioms and sayings unique to their cultures. The seminar was a treasure trove of knowledge. Each speaker introduced a set of expressions, explained their origins, and shared personal anecdotes about how these sayings had influenced their lives. I was fascinated by expressions like, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do," and how similar ideas existed in other cultures with different words. I engaged with the speakers by asking questions about the literal translations of these idioms and their practical applications in daily conversations. This interaction deepened my appreciation for the richness of English as a language influenced by many cultures, and it motivated me to incorporate these expressions into my vocabulary. I found that understanding the cultural context behind a phrase made it easier to remember and use naturally in conversation. Additionally, I made it a point to reflect on my learning journey by keeping a detailed journal. In my journal, I recorded not only new words and phrases, but also my feelings about different conversations and experiences. I noted down moments when I felt particularly proud of my progress, as well as times when I struggled to keep up with. Rapid exchanges. This ongoing self-reflection served as both a motivator and a learning tool, allowing me to track my progress and identify patterns in my behavior. I often revisited old entries to see how far I had come, and each entry reminded me that language learning is a continuous process, filled with ups and downs that all contribute to overall improvement. There were also days when I would simply sit in a park with my headphones, listening to ambient sounds mixed with snippets of conversations from passers-by. Even in these moments of quiet observation, I learned a great deal about how natural conversation flows. I noticed how the sound of laughter, the quick interjections, and even the background chatter contributed to the overall atmosphere of a public space. These observations helped me understand that effective listening is not solely about the words spoken, but also about tuning into the environment, the emotions conveyed, and the subtle cues that make communication dynamic and multi-layered. I have spent countless hours engaging with these various practices, each one a small step towards a more confident, fluent, and natural use of English. From busy conferences to quiet moments in nature, from structured workshops to spontaneous conversations, every experience has been a valuable lesson in the art of listening and speaking. Whether it was learning new idioms, practicing pronunciation, with the help of technology, or simply enjoying the rich tapestry of human interaction, each moment contributed to a deeper understanding of the language. To wrap up, improving your English listening and speaking skills takes time, patience, and consistent practice. The more you expose yourself to the language, the more comfortable and confident you will become. Start small, focus on understanding common words and phrases, and build your skills step by step. Remember, making mistakes is completely normal. It's part of the learning process. The key is to keep going, stay motivated, and enjoy the journey. Whether you are listening to podcasts, watching English videos, or speaking with others, every little effort brings you closer to fluency. Thank you for joining today's episode. Keep practicing, stay positive, and I'll see you next time. Happy learning!